Welcome to another edition of Life, Love, and Philosophy. This is the second program I'm doing in a series of programs on the great French wisdom writer Michel de Montaigne. He is considered to be one of the great wisdom writers in the Western tradition. His subject matter is the human condition. Few writers have addressed themselves so specifically to so many dimensions of the human condition. For example, the joys and the difficulties of being a human being. Let me provide a brief review, some background information on him. Montaigne lived in the 16th century. He did not write long books, but rather essays. Like the American Ralph Waldo Emerson, Montaigne is considered to be a great essayist. Most of his essays are rather short. I would say the typical essay runs something like 20 to 25 pages long. Among the main themes of his essays are the following: lifelong education. Montaigne writes a lot about what might be the most important things we can learn in life. Another one of his major themes is human nature. He had a great curiosity about human nature, and indeed his own nature, which of course is part of human nature. Indeed, one of the expressions that Montaigne often quotes comes from the ancient Greek world, and the ancient maxim is, know thyself. Montaigne paid a lot of attention to that expression and trying to come to a better understanding of himself. Among the other themes, prominent themes of Montaigne's essays are the following: friendship, the art of conversation, religion, books. Indeed, he has an essay on books in which he talks about the value of reading good books. Also, other themes about which Montaigne writes are sickness and death. The overarching theme of Montaigne's essays is wisdom. He is searching for wisdom. He wants to live a life based on wisdom, and he wants to share with the reader some of the things he's learned about life that might help the readers become more wise people. And by wisdom, Montaigne means good sense, good judgment. So he in his life made a very serious effort to try to acquire, by many means, and I'll be talking about those means, good sense and good judgment. Montaigne was born in 1533 in the city of Bordeaux in France. He died in 1592 at the age of 59. Shakespeare was 28 years old when Montaigne died. Why do I mention that? Well, some literary critics believe that Shakespeare and Montaigne were the two finest writers of the Renaissance. Montaigne was married to the same woman for more than 30 years. His wife gave birth to 5 children, 4 of whom died shortly after birth. Before retiring to a life of writing at the age of 39, Montaigne had been a lawyer and indeed had also been the mayor of the city of Bordeaux in France. But in his essays, he expresses strong disapproval of many lawyers and politicians. He did not have, in general, Montaigne did not have a high opinion of lawyers or politicians. Montaigne lived at a time of a religious civil war in France. In the 16th century, Protestants and Catholics in France were at each other's throats. Indeed, in previous programs, I've alluded to the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre which took place in 1592 in France, when Montaigne was 39 years old. And on that day, in Paris alone, on that day, at least 10,000 Protestants were killed by Catholics. Indeed, some estimates go as high as 25,000 Protestants killed by Catholics. I must add, by the way, in fairness to the Catholics, that it was not unusual for Protestants to kill Catholics. Montaigne was a Catholic, but he was highly critical of any person who would kill in the name of religion. Indeed, despite the fact that Montaigne was a Catholic, his essays, about 100 years after he died, were put on the Catholic Church's index of forbidden books. Montaigne's essays are relatively easy to read. Indeed, some of his essays today are assigned to 14-year-olds in France. Montaigne believed that we can learn to live more fulfilling lives, but that it takes serious effort. Here are his own words. "There is nothing so difficult as to learn how to live this life well." He also said this, "Life must be studied, relished, and meditated upon. It takes good management to enjoy life." He believed that life is bittersweet. Indeed, that life is often difficult. Again, his own words. Anyone who is capable of bravely bearing the ordinary misfortunes of life would have no need to increase his courage to become a soldier. And then Montaigne quotes Seneca, who said this, "To live is to fight." According to Montaigne, living well involves learning to become more tranquil. And how does one become more tranquil? Well, among the things Montaigne learned about becoming more tranquil were the following. We must all learn to endure the rough spots in life that cannot be avoided. And if we're going to become more tranquil places, we have to look in the right places for joy. So many of the wisdom writers over the centuries have claimed that most people look in the wrong places for joy and pay a price for that. Montaigne comments that while his life involved much stress and even physical pain, we know he often suffered from kidney stones in his adult life, that nevertheless he learned to increase his tranquility and joy. In his essays, especially in his essay entitled On Experience, he shares with the reader what he has learned about living a more fulfilling life. His formula for living a more satisfying life has several main ingredients. First, living a good life, according to Montaigne, involves habitual self-study, introspection, acquiring a greater understanding of oneself. In previous programs, I've compared this to learning how to use a computer. That if one knows well how to use a computer, it will mean that one will be a lot less frustrated in using it if one has only a cursory knowledge of how to operate a computer. Well, by the same token, if Montaigne were alive today, he would say if one understands oneself, life will be a lot less frustrating than if one has great ignorance about oneself. Also included in Montaigne's formula for living a more fulfilling life is learning to better understand human nature and life, primarily by reading good books. Montaigne was well acquainted with the great writers of antiquity and their works, writers such as Seneca, Plutarch, Plato, Aristotle, and he did believe that in reading these writers, they helped him along the way to acquire increasing wisdom. And a third ingredient in Montaigne's formula for living a more fulfilling life: endurance, perseverance, fortitude. Time and again, Montaigne in his writings comments that we must learn to endure suffering that cannot be avoided. Also, Montaigne believed that a good life was impossible without a serious effort to be virtuous, without a serious effort to be a decent person. Montaigne was one of those thinkers who believed that regardless of whether there is a God or a heaven or a hell, it is in our selfish interest to be good people if we wish to increase our happiness. Here are his own words: "There is a certain gratification in doing good deeds, which gives us joy." He went on to say that very evil people can never access this kind of joy that good people access by doing good deeds. Montaigne also said the following, and I'm quoting him: "A generous pride accompanies a good conscience." Since Montaigne looked to good books, to help guide him to a more satisfying life, we should not be surprised that he wrote an essay entitled "On Books." And according to Montaigne, in this essay, what does he tell us in a very specific way about what he learned from reading important books? Again, his own words: "In books, I only look for the pleasure of honest entertainment. Or, if I study, the only learning I look for is that which tells me how to know myself and which teaches me how to live well and die well." So again, he's hoping in good books to learn more about himself, and he's also looking for knowledge that will help him to live better and die better. His essays, as I indicated before, are full of quotations from famous writers of antiquity, especially Seneca and Plato. Montaigne claimed that books provided him with mental exercise. Those are his words. It's interesting that in America, we live in a culture that often emphasizes physical exercise, which of course is very important. Indeed, Montaigne, in his essays, also talks about the importance of physical exercise. But I think it's rare that in our society, you'll hear people talking about the necessity of mental exercise. And Montaigne believed that, again, one of the places one can exercise one's mind is in reading good books. In his essay on books, he speaks about, and I'm quoting him, the companionship that books have provided him with. Here are his own words, and I think you will find them interesting. "This companionship of books has accompanied me all along my way and assists me everywhere. It comforts me in my old age and solitude. It frees me from the weight of a tedious idleness. It dulls the pangs," again, the companionship of books, "dulls the pangs of any grief that is not intense and overmastering." He continues, "I never travel without books, nor do I, by the way. You cannot imagine how much ease and comfort I draw from the thought that they are beside me, to give me pleasure when I choose, and from the feeling that they bring me great help. They are the best provision I have found for this human journey. Again, Montaigne, near the end of his essay on books, says, and I'm quoting him, "They are the best provision I have found for this human journey." By the way, a reminder, on my website, I provide a short list of very important books. I'm hoping one of these days to provide a much more extended list. But as you know, in so many of my programs, I've alluded to important books. And indeed, I'm looking forward in a short time to doing a couple of programs just on books to provide some guidance to some people who may not be avid readers but are interested in beginning a serious reading program. Montaigne, in writing about exercising the mind, says that conversation, good conversation, can be the most fruitful exercise of the mind. Can be. Why can be? Well, because conversation, if it's going to be fruitful, often depends on whom we are conversing with. Montaigne says this, again, in his essay entitled On Conversation, and I'm quoting him, "Just as our mind is strengthened by conversation with orderly and vigorous intellects, it loses and is debased by our constant intercourse with feeble and mean intellects." Again, our intellects can be strengthened by conversations with certain people, whom again he says have orderly and vigorous intellects, but also we can suffer in a certain sense and lose in a definite sense in conversations with people who he claims have feeble and mean intellects. Montaigne claimed that education should teach people how to properly communicate with other people. Now, you might argue this isn't something that should be taught in school. It's common sense. Knowing how to talk to other people is common sense. I'm confident Montaigne and so many of the great thinkers would say it's not common sense. And they would point to the conversations so many people have on a daily basis. Look around and observe how many people speak to others with insensitivity. How many people are on power trips when they converse with others? How many people are insincere in conversation? How many are bullying? How many resort to sarcasm and condescension? And how many people habitually focus on trivial matters when they converse with others? The idea is that in our conversations with others, we should pay attention to whether these other people are happiness givers or happiness stealers. Conversations with happiness givers can indeed be therapeutic. Conversations with happiness stealers can be quite depressing in a certain sense, if not stressful. Spinoza, the great Dutch philosopher, on the subject of conversation, said this: "Men govern nothing with more difficulty than their tongues." Confucius said this. He said, "When you talk to certain people, you waste your words." Jesus talked about the connection between the heart and the mouth. Here are Jesus' own words. "For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. I will tell you On the day of judgment, you will have to give an account of every careless word you utter. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. So Jesus obviously attached a lot of importance to how people talk to each other. That quotation, by the way, comes from Mark 12. Montaigne liked conversation which challenged his thinking. Montaigne claims he enjoyed participating in a discussion involving disagreement about important ideas and issues. Why so? Why could Montaigne enjoy conversing with people who often disagreed with him? Well, because he said it exercised his mind. He also said, the world is a school of inquiry. And you must realize that Montaigne had an insatiable curiosity, and he felt that by conversing with certain people who disagreed with him about certain important issues and ideas, he could better satisfy his curiosity. Montaigne points out that his chief concern in such a conversation was discovering the truth and not winning the argument. Let me say that again. Montaigne, in his essay entitled On Conversation, stresses the idea that when we converse with people who disagree with us, our aim should not be to win the argument. Our aim should be to discover the truth. And it can happen that the person who disagrees with us may be right, that perhaps more truth is on his or her side than on our side. And such a conversation can be illuminating. And we should be grateful if we have the opportunity to converse with someone who can teach us something. Montaigne says this about such conversations, and I'm quoting him. When I am opposed in conversation, my attention is roused, not my anger, not my anger. I go out to meet the man who contradicts me. The cause of truth ought to be a cause common to both of us. Again, the cause of truth ought to be a cause common to both of us. Question: is Montaigne in a minority in that he's not as interested in winning the argument as discovering truth? What do you think? Montaigne claimed it is impossible to have a good conversation with a fool. That's his word, fool, not my word. Again, it's impossible to have a good conversation with a fool. What does Montaigne mean by a fool? Which kinds of people is it probably not worthwhile having a conversation with? Well, people who can't tolerate a different opinion. People so intent on advancing their own argument that they're not even listening to your argument. People who raise their voice as if shouting you down proves the validity of their argument. People ruled and governed by anger. Montaigne says that some people in conversation are looking for a quarrel. In fact, here are Montaigne's words. Obstinacy and heated argument are the surest proofs of stupidity. He also says that we should avoid conversing with people who habitually speak as if they are certain about issues about which it's impossible to be certain. Montaigne says he enjoys conversing with people who soften and moderate their statements with expressions such as, I think, I believe, in my opinion, it seems to me. In other words, Montaigne, like Benjamin Franklin, by the way, who also wrote a lot about what we can all do to improve our conversational ability, Montaigne, like Emerson, believed we should generally avoid being dogmatic and making dogmatic assertions in conversation. And again, instead, use expressions like "I think," or "it seems to me." Montaigne claimed there is even a right way and a wrong way to speak the truth. Here are his own words. "Any man may speak the truth, but to speak methodically, prudently, and ably, that few men can do." Well, why can telling the truth be a problem? Well, so many of the great thinkers have told us that so often the truth is painful. In fact, there is an English proverb, "The truth hurts." Historian Will Durant said this, "There are few things in the world so unpopular as truth." Emily Dickinson gave this advice about telling the truth: "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant." Finally, Montaigne says that all of us talk too much. Here are his own words. "The world is all babble, and I have never met a man who did not talk more than he should. Half our lives are wasted in this way, in idle conversation." What do you think? Do all of us generally talk too much? I'll have much more to say about Montaigne next week and in the following weeks. But right now, as is my custom, I'd like to conclude with a quotation from Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau believed we are all artists. In Walden, his masterpiece, he penned the following words: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."